Before we get to today's stories, I would like to say a disclaimer. The stories presented in this video delve into themes that might be unsettling for some viewers, including graphic descriptions and eerie scenarios. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. These tales aren't for the faint of heart. If my chilling content sends shivers down your spine and leaves you craving more, please subscribe to my channel. Your support means the world to me. My parents and I got lost in Grand Gulch for 2 days. On the tail end of a 5-day trip, we were exiting the canyon. The route seemed a lot more difficult than we anticipated. We knew there would be a faint trail, if any, but once we crested the rim, we found out we were way off course. Knowing the general direction we needed to head, we started walking and conserving water as much as we could, having left the multitude of water pockets in the canyon below us. Slept that night under a pinyon pine and shared our last couple power bars, hoping to find some source of water the next day in the open desert. After a few miles the next morning, we finally came upon a faint road that became more pronounced as we went on. This road brought some good feelings, knowing we stashed a shuttle bike for someone to ride the last 8 or so miles to the van. Finally got to the bike cache, and my stepdad hopped on as a rainstorm started rolling in. After half an hour or so, it turned to full downpour, which was great because we were thirsty as fuck. After walking what felt like an eternity and wondering where our damn ride was, we walked upon the primitive ass, empty, other than our van, parking lot. We see my stepdad tearing through it, trying to get the damn thing started. A dead battery. He ended up riding through thick mud, another 6 miles to the highway to try to flag someone down. Ended up catching the eye of a ranger out patrolling who got us a tow and took us into Blanding, UT, while we got that bastard of a van running again. That felt like a lot for 11-year-old me. In college, I went camping and hunting with a girlfriend on an island where my family has a very tiny plot of unusable land. The island borders the Ship Channel in coastal Louisiana, about 5 miles from the Gulf. This place is relatively new, but I've scouted it before. We get to the spot and I have to pull my boat across about 60 yards worth of 4-inch water over a sandy bottom to get close to the shoreline. I then bury a big 4 aluminum rod as far as I can get it into the sand with my bow rope on it. Boat's tied up, girlfriend is excited. We bushwhack our way to somewhat of a sandy clearing on a hill next to a small bluff where the boat is staked and tied below. First issue, no mosquito repellent, and they were awful. Whatever. We pick up and head into the thickets, being careful because there were signs of massive hogs out there. We find a spot, set up, and start hunting. Aside from the mosquitoes, we didn't see anything but a really pretty sunset. That's when it all went to shit. I didn't have a flashlight. We ended up getting into some thick stuff on the way back, and pigs started darting around. We could hear them, but couldn't see. I only had the laser on my AR, which was absolutely useless for vision. She's freaking out, pigs are crashing around. We pushed forward slowly and made it out and quickly walked back to camp to start a fire. We had to shoo some wild cows away from our spot, and one broke one of my tent poles, but whatever, it was working. We started a fire and ate, and everything was a little better. So we turned in. I tossed and turned. It was like 60, but the humidity and fog was so bad it was dripping off the roof of the tent, soaking wet, cold. We were just trying to make it through. I woke up to the sound of a hurricane, waves crashing ridiculously loud. I thought, what the hell? Then I thought the boat. I ran down there with no light, on the laser on my AR and the dim light of the moon through the fog. A big LNG ship had come down the channel, and it pushes a wall of water that, when it gets to the shallows, curls up and crashes and drags trees. It's pretty violent. So I look, no boat. I'm fucking full panic now. I start shining the laser around, hoping to bounce off something. It took about a minute, and I hit the shiny reflective boat registration tag. It was well into the Ship Channel. I ditched my pants and gun and started swimming at night in the Ship Channel. I get to my boat, tangled in trees from the bow rope and half sunk. I got it back finally, and it was about 5 a.m. Once there was enough light, I packed up the tent and we left. That was absolutely the worst night camping in my life. Oh geez. There are lots of situations where it snowed or was super cold or small accidents. But one stands out that took me a while to deal with and was fairly recent. I was visiting my family and decided to bring my gear to go camping with my dad and youngest brother. We had never been with just the three of us as adults. My dad was in declining health at this point in time and was going to need a transplant soon, so we stayed close and went car camping nearby in the mountains. It was a beautiful spot, and it ended up being a super nice time. Very chill, good food, fun conversation around the fire. We woke up in the morning and started making coffee and breakfast, and my dad went to pee. He was pretty weak, and we watched him basically just collapse and fall forward face first down an embankment of boulders into a wash or gully or whatever you call it. We jumped up and ran to him. His nose looked broken, his face sliced, the top of his hand had degloved due to his thin skin. He was concussed but mostly okay. I went into overdrive, grabbed a tarp from under a tent and threw it over the seat of my brother's car. We washed off what dirt we could from my dad and set up to take him down the mountain to the hospital, which wasn't terribly far. I stayed behind to clean up camp and process aging family and life circumstances changing. And then it gets worse. The doctor was pretty skeptical of his injuries, tested his back thinking he might be drunk in spite of the fact he had been going through treatment for liver disease. And he was right. Something like 0.2% at 7 a.m. Basically, my dad had been suffering from a pretty bad depression from being so sick, so he had decided to just go the whole way. From what I understand, the drinking wasn't what triggered the disease, but definitely was exacerbated by it. It was rough, in ways that I still don't fully comprehend. The good news is that it was a big wake-up call, I think, even for him. So he told a lot of people in his community, stopped drinking, ended up getting a transplant. We went winter camping last month now that he has been recovering, mostly to just have another experience that wasn't so traumatic. It was nice though. I will still say that one trip was one of the top 5 for hardest days of my life. A few years back, I decided to go camping with about 10 other friends at Snevely Hot Springs in eastern Oregon on Friday the 13th, also a full moon. The trip was only a little over an hour, and I had work the next day, so I decided I wasn't going to drink much, so I wouldn't be hungover in the morning. Anyways, we arrive, set up camp in a lovely spot away from everyone else, drink a little, and head to the springs where we have an amazing time together, laughing, smiling, and making best friends soup while watching the sunset. Truly one of the most lovely experiences of my life. The majority of us decided we wanted to go on a night walk and enjoy the mountains illuminated by the full moon and the stars. We get out, head back to camp, put on some warm clothes and start to get ready to head out. Well, half of us are ready to go and the other half are lollygagging around. Some of us are drunks, high, and distracted. So overall, it was actually pretty difficult to get all of us in a spot where we were ready to go. It was really dark at this point and people dipped out, so only a few of us ended up actually going on this night walk. Side note, the 3 of us that went had all been microdosing mushrooms pretty much the majority of the night. Things were slightly trippy, but I don't like to get super glonky and or unaware of my surroundings. So it's the 3 of us. Myself, my friend girl, and my friend boy, and friend boy's dog. We did have a flashlight, but most definitely should have had a headlamp for all of us. We're walking uphill for about 10 minutes and we take a right onto a trail. In front of the trail, though, was a cattle guard, aka a stock grid. We pick up the dog and cross it and start walking this trail. The cattle guard adjacent to a couple barbed wire fences should have been the very first sign not to cross it, but we crossed it. We didn't even make it 3 minutes without hearing some very loud, close-by rustling in front of us. We stop in our tracks and homeboy in the front of the line starts scanning the area with his flashlight. When I tell you, I have never been so scared in my life. Have you ever seen a cat's eyes in the dark? The way they glow is chilling, especially when the cat is bigger than you. So we're face to face with a big old mountain lion. It's not more than a few yards in front of us. Instinct kicks in for all of us, and we just back away slowly. We back away, back away, back away. The dog, on the other hand, had an instinct of its own and ran off to the side. We could see her running alongside of us, but a couple yards away. Well, we back away until we can't back away anymore and hit the barbed wire fence, and sure enough, we see the dog is right next to us. So what was that running alongside of us? We shine the flashlight, and holy shit, another mountain lion. How lucky were we to run into mama and baby together? On the other side of the fence was someone else's campsite. We had no choice but to turn around and jump it. We got the dog over first, and then jumped it and ripped all of our clothing in the process, and friend boy cut his leg pretty bad. So we're in someone else's campsite on Friday the 13th, under a full moon, in the mountains, tripping on some mushrooms, and completely lost. We don't know where the people are, but we don't care. We got into their unlocked car and honked the horn for about a minute to scare off the cougars. We made sure to clearly yell and let any and everybody around us know that we weren't robbers and that there were cougars close by. We got out after a couple mins and were pretty weirded out that nobody came out to check on their campsite. My friend girl swore she could hear someone screaming or trying to scream, but her boyfriend, aka friend boy, insisted that we needed to leave the campsite. Part of me believed her, even though I didn't hear any noises, but I was also ready to GTFO away from the area. We found the exit of their campsite, and on the way back to ours, I said my final prayers. I'm not even religious. We got back to camp, and every rustling noise around me had me convinced that we were being stalked by these cougars. I had a full-fledged panic attack in the car for about an hour, and was absolutely covered in gnats because the sunroof was cracked. Everyone else was having fun around the campfire, even the other two who had just gone through the same experience I did. Friend girl got in the car with me and got herself covered in bugs just to help me out of my sheer panic. She brought a bottle of tequila and a pocket full of mushrooms and told me we'd die happy together if we died tonight, and I gained enough courage to get out of the car and have fun with my friends. I was hungover as shit the next day and no showed my job and got fired when I got back into town. Was worth every second, but holy shit, I am traumatized. Sometimes I'll even have nightmares about them stalking me. Sorry about the long read. Also always, pack in it, pack it out. You can get trippy and still clean up after yourselves. Also, word of advice, don't scale a mountain at night in a place native to large wildcats. Or do. YOLO edit? Thinking about what could have been happening at that other campsite still chills me to my core, all the time. Friend girl and I aren't in touch anymore, but I wonder if it still keeps her up at night too. I decided my first camp would be by myself and on a closed trail for, and I quote, so nobody else will be there and I can have the trail all by myself, which I still stand by, but boy, I wish I would have been smarter for at least my first time. I went on a closed hiking trail in California with a bunch of overly heavy gear. I felt really nervous because my biggest fear of the woods has never been snakes, bears, coyotes, but the silent killer of a cougar. I kept telling myself I was psyching myself out because I could have swore I saw the outline of a cougar in the distance, but was most likely paranoia. I didn't have my glasses so I could see everything, but after around 30 feet was like blurred edges where I can make out what stuff is, but I have to get closer to confirm. Anyways, I burned through my water quick and finally found a flat area off the trail. I decided I'd make this my camp, and even more dumbly decided as a deterrent for animals and people I'd set up my Snugpak ionosphere on an inclining slope. Setup was pretty easy and I felt more relaxed. I tried to build a wood shelter but soon found that was hard and just scattered the sticks around and on my tent for camo. Then I heard voices and was like, what the fuck? Poked my head around the tree in front of my tent and saw a couple walking on the trail. I hid and they didn't see me. And since I was a bit freaked out, people were actually on the trail when they weren't supposed to be. I was wary for until dark. I was in my tent with my Bluetooth radio, playing music and trying to get used to the chitters and rustling of weird animals. I hear Spanish being spoken and turn off the radio. It gets closer and I'm think, who the hell hikes when it's literally dark in a 12-mile deep forest trail? I make the dumbest decision and yell hello, and the voices go quiet. I grab my Bowie knife and hold it close with my sleeping bag already zipped open just in case. I'm deadly still and muster up the courage to say hello one more time, only to hear something running up the slope, very loud steps and brush moving sounds. And I yell, grab my flashlight, and get out of my tent only in Longhorns with my knife. I threaten, I'm gonna gut you and feed on your corpse, you son of a bitch. You think I'm not armed up in these woods? I'm crazy and I'll kill everyone I want to, the loudest I can muster, and look around with the light, run on the trail to find anything, then return to my tent. I was awake for sure then, and then here's the second scariest part of that night. I tried to call my best friend to let him know what trail I was on and if I don't come back where my body will be. He can't understand me, but I can hear him, and I've never felt so alone. I hung up and decide I'll just wait until the sun's back. It was so long and every noise made my mind wander. I could hear the wind howl and the animals do their thing, when I open my eyes and feel the biggest dread I've ever felt in my life. I don't move because I'm paralyzed with fear, and behind my back I hear one of the wooden sticks make the thud noise when wood clanks against wood. I know that could only mean something stepped near my tent and disturbed it. I both want and don't want to look back through the mesh of my tent. I listen closer and don't hear anything until around 20 minutes later, I hear a not heavy but forcefully breathe in. For reference, I have a Great Dane, and he has done a very similar noise of breathing in one big huff, but not exactly a sniff. In my mind, this has to be a cougar because only a Great Dane-sized animal could make that. I freeze, and I have never ever understood the true meaning of dread until I couldn't move if I wanted to, and my mind began flashing one word, and that was pray. I heard a lip smack again, akin to what my Great Dane has done, and I was uncomfortable but couldn't move. My mind juggled between making noise or staying quiet. I chose to stay quiet and stayed deathly still until I hear the birds making noises again, and it's nearly morning by then. When daybreak hit, I came out, and with the final % of my phone, took crappy pics of cougar prints the size of my palm around my tent. I grabbed everything and went to my car, slept until deadass. I hear a car park and 2 high schoolers with backpacks go past my car speaking Spanish and onto the trail. So my first night camping was alone, what I thought were crackheads, and a cougar. I was shaky the whole ride home. That's my experience. A couple years ago, me and a buddy were camping out on a little island at a lake way out in the country. The only way to access this island was climbing over an old broken bridge for cars that was halfway in the water. Anyway, we had camped there multiple times in the past and got our tent all set up and got a fire going quickly before dark. Once it got pretty late, maybe 11 to 12 p.m., we were sitting around the fire enjoying a meal we cooked on it when we both saw something weird about 20 feet from our campsite that made us both freeze and stop talking. There was 2 white lights side by side moving up and down. They looked like not flashlights, just orbs of light, more like. We both stood up and started shouting out, "Who's there?" with no response. This was making both of us extremely nervous, because if this was a person, why wouldn't they respond to us? But after calling out, the light started moving around the entire edge of our campsite, then started moving toward the edge of the woods very quickly and completely still. If this was a person holding a light, I feel like it would at least move or jiggle a little while they were moving. But these lights were almost just gliding through the air, and they moved right through the water and up a massive hill with no pausing or changing directions until it was out of sight. We both immediately packed up our tent and got TF out of there, 'cause it spooked us pretty bad. Still have no idea what this could be. Let me know if you have questions. I suck at writing. Back in 2021, my husband and I were camping in Wyoming at the Boysen Reservoir. We got really lucky and were able to book a beachfront site directly leading to the water, but the downside was that it was very, very far away from the other campsites. We were essentially isolated from everyone else. At the time, though, it sounded like a dream come true. The thing about Wyoming is that it's so desolate to the point where it's pitch black and eerily dead silent once the sun is gone. We set up our camp, enjoyed our fire, but shortly after that, a random SUV with blacked-out windows came driving down our road and into our sight. They drove towards us. My husband tried to wave to them in case they were lost and needed help, but instead they ignored us and drove down to the beach, stayed there for 5 minutes, turned around and went back up the way they came. We immediately got a bad vibe. My husband told me to throw everything in the car, and he kept shining a flashlight towards the beach because we had a feeling they dropped someone off to watch us. After we packed up, we got in the car and hauled ass. Lo and behold, the same car drove back into our campsite, and when they saw us leaving, they actually started chasing us. Mind you, the roads in Wyoming are bumpy and unkept when you're in the wilderness. On top of that, enormous wildlife that wanders in and out of the streets. My husband said, "I have to go fast. Are you okay with that?" And I said, "Just go and get us out of here." We were easily going 80 miles per hour down these windy roads, and even through a canyon, they were on our tail for about 10 minutes until we lost them after passing through the canyon. Most terrifying experience of our lives. We think about it to this day and wonder what could have happened if we didn't listen to our gut at that moment. Edit. Wow, I had no idea this would blow up. To those who shared their stories and experiences like this post was intended for, thank you. To those who made it a debate about guns, you do you, but I want to live and not be ignorant to the fact that dangerous people do, in fact, exist. And to those who claimed I'm either lying or paranoid, for one, we tried to engage with them, but these folk barreled past us without a word. First red flag. 2. Our site was so isolated. Why would anyone pull up to our campsite just to sit at the beach for a few minutes and then leave? You can't drive across the sand to the other campsites because of the water, so if you're coming to our site, you're doing it for a reason. Second red flag. We were chased by them for miles after we started leaving, so it's pretty self-explanatory at that point. Boom, suspicions confirmed. I grew up in Wyoming, but for some reason we generally went to Colorado to go camping. I was about 12 years old, early 80s. I woke up early, or in the middle of the night. It was dark and we were in the mountains, so it was cold. I was going to go get in the car because I was freezing. I drug my sleeping bag out, climbing over my brother and waking him up in the process. Of course, he said he had to pee, which I thought was probably BS, because he always had to follow me wherever I went. Anyway, we get out of the tent, and it's getting light out, so I decide to stay up. He, of course, wants to know what I'm doing because I had told him I was going to the car. I told him the sun was coming up, so I might as well stay up, and I pointed to the light across the top of the mountain. Now, yes, my brother was a little pest, but he was Cub Scout. Also, I was absolutely directionally challenged until I was well into adulthood. My dad joked that I'd get lost going to my own room. Anyway, the Cub Scout tells me that the sun doesn't rise over there, and being the older sibling, I was required to argue. Of course, this woke my parents, and Dad sticks his head out to holler at us and notices the bright red glow as well. Only he knows exactly what it is, a forest fire. We grabbed our stuff lightning quick, didn't even take anything out of the tent, just collapsed it and shoved it and everything else into the back of our 1976 Ford Country Squire. Dad drove as fast as he dared on the crappy, narrow, winding gravel road. He kept telling us everything was going to be fine. We were well ahead of the fire, but between the quickly thickening smoke and the lack of guardrails between us and what looked like the abyss was scaring the bejesus out of me. We hadn't been driving very long when we saw a game warden truck coming out of one of the side roads to another campground. He flashed his lights, and we stopped, and Dad talked to him for a bit. Apparently, the fire was spreading rather quickly, and he was out evacuating campsites. He did tell Dad that we had enough time to get out and not to panic. It didn't seem to do any good because we were going at a pretty good speed again, and I didn't feel particularly relieved until we got back home. Every time I see videos of people escaping wildfires out west or up in Canada, I remember that, and a tiny spot at the back of my brain freaks out a little bit. I am writing this from memory, as this occurred in August of 2019. This story contains elements of suspense, and there is a firearm involved. If you are sensitive to this matter, it is the reader's discretion to continue. I am not going to make this post political in any way, and I don't want any political discussions to appear in the comment section. The story starts here. I am what would be classified as an outdoors person. I primitive camp in dispersed areas of public land. I hike and explore in areas that are extremely rugged, and often a local guide is recommended for people inexperienced hiking Utah's high mountain peaks and deserts. I am trained and experienced with using bushcraft skills. I do everything I can related to the outdoors, fishing, boating, everything. Sometimes I am with family or friends, but usually I prefer to be alone in my explorations. It is not recommended, even for people experienced with the outdoors. I am not your parent or babysitter, so I am not going to tell you what to do. But for your safety, if you do decide to solo explore anywhere, please have survival skill training with knowledge of local resources of wherever you are intending to adventure. One of the things I do and try to do daily as my form of exercise is metal detecting. When I am out on explorations, this often includes finding long ago abandoned mines, ghost towns, and other signs of pioneer settlements. During one of my explorations, I decided to attempt finding a particular ghost town I had seen on an old map. I packed my gear and equipment and hit the road. I will type the next part in a general report format and then return to classic paragraph writing. The details in the report will come into play during the rest of the story. Site arrival, late afternoon, approximately 4:30 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, mid-August 2019. Temperature environment, high mountain desert, extremely hot and dry, no wind. 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Site conditions, barren, very difficult to access. Some structures remaining but in very poor and unsafe conditions. Last known inhabitants mid-1930s, left because the local mine closed during the Great Depression. Most recent signs of activity from vandals, partiers, and hunting groups. Access. Inhabitants of former town used horseback and handcarts for primary transportation, and the railroad passes just outside of town for the miners to ride into work. Modern-day transportation has difficulty with access, even with four-wheel drive and off-road equipment. The roads to access this area are extremely rugged, with desert rock terrains ascending and descending across sharp cliffsides and deep canyon walls. The nearest current rural resident is almost 17 miles away. Accessing this area on foot is near impossible. I arrived and set up my shelter, a two-man tent that requires staking into the ground and has a full-cover rain shell. Entering the tent means zipping open the rain shell and then zipping open the tent door. I found an area in a stand of juniper trees and pushed the stakes into the soft soil under the base of the trunks and roots. I was happy. It was early evening, my shelter was already up. I had my cooking fire roaring away and preparing itself for the juicy ribeye I was eating for dinner. While my fire was setting up, I performed a basic security check of my location. I walked around in V-shaped lines through my camp area and then explored the immediate perimeter. I was completely alone, isolated in desolation, with no signs of current human activity for as far as I could see and hear. It was paradise. I didn't see anything of particular concern during my patrol, aside from taking the general precautions of possible wildlife encounters, snakes, mountain lions, etc. I headed back to camp, had dinner, a drink of bourbon, and went to bed around 21:30 hours. Before bedding down for the night, I performed one last sweep of my camp and ensured everything was locked down. I climbed into my tent, prepped my sleeping spot, put my gun in its normal spot next to me, and turned out my light. I awoke the next morning when the sun became too intense to bear. It was only just after 7 a.m. and already hot as hell outside. My feet were facing east, so the morning sun was glaring directly into my face. I tried to pull my pillow and extra blanket over my eyes and create a shade tent. It worked. I started drifting back to sleep. Then my bladder decided it was also awake and desperately needed to be emptied. I fought the urge to get up and rolled back over. I started shutting my eyes again. Then I heard something that immediately sent shivers down my spine. At this point, I will let you in on a little bit of background about myself without going into any specific details. I have spent much of my working life in security and investigation positions. I have been involved in hostile situations requiring use of force and been assigned to high-risk cases. During the course of my employment, I have learned how to track and locate humans. With this adapted skill set comes certain abilities, like being able to identify details about someone based on listening to their footsteps. And that is exactly what caught my attention that morning, laying in my tent with an overfilled bladder trying to burst out the front of my abdomen. Footsteps, human footsteps, very close to where I was laying. I lay completely still. In the desert, it is so quiet that you can hear pebbles bouncing off the face of boulders from across a canyon. Any movement I made would alert this person. I do not know their intentions, and definitely don't want them to come any closer to my tent. I froze, motionless, and focused on performing intentional breathing. In 2-3-4, out 2-3-4. Repeat. This helped immediately slow my heart rate and allow me to reground my senses. The entire time, I am listening to this person walking around my camp. From the sound of the footsteps, it is a male, unknown age or appearance, unknown height, weight, approximately 180-200 pounds. His footsteps are alarming, aside from their presence. The way he is placing his feet is in an unnatural and intentional pattern. He isn't just strolling through, he is moving methodically, as if trying to tiptoe through the desert. The same way a predator moves while circling its prey and trying to camouflage their motions so as to not disturb the surrounding environment. I continue listening and breathing, hoping my intentional breathing sounds like someone dozing heavily and unaware. He tiptoes away from me towards my car. I listen as he tries pulling on the car doors. I hear him walking around the car, probably looking in the windows. In the back seat is my daughter's car seat. It is always in there, even when I am out solo. I also have things like princess coloring books and a pink-colored pencil case sitting in plain view in the back seat. He has moved to the other side of my car now, where the footsteps are much further away. I take advantage of this moment and very quietly but steadily pull the zipper down on my sleeping bag. I take a second to stretch my limbs to relieve the tense cramping and quietly roll to my side. I grab the holster of my gun and quickly pop it from my belt. I rolled back into a more comfortable position and sat completely still again. I listened carefully to what the intruder was doing. He was still making his predatory walk, moving in all directions. South of the camp, approximately 50 feet. Back to camp. East of the camp, approximately 50 feet. Back to camp. As if he was checking to see if anyone else was around. Maybe checking to ensure there are no witnesses or passersby to interfere with whatever his plan is. Suddenly, he changed directions. He was walking my direction. Not walking, slow charging. The same intimidating walk that police officers do when approaching a suspect. Commanding, purposeful, marching directly towards my tent. His intense walking pattern was also making quite a bit of racket, so he was unable to hear anything I might have been doing. I slowly changed positions so I was sitting up, making sure not to make any drastic movements that would ruffle the tent. I quietly pulled my firearm from the holster and switched the safety to off upon its release in my hand. I pulled my arms into my chest, raising the gun to the hold-ready position. I waited. He was still on his march, almost to the side of my tent. He stopped directly at the side and then slowly crept around it, looking to see if I was awake. He then slowly walked around to the front of the tent and stood there. He walked back and forth a couple of times, looking in different directions. Then he came up to the tent door. I heard him undo the Velcro for the zipper on the rainfly. I held the grip of my pistol with my right hand and had my left laying flat and peacefully across the top of the slide. With a certain amount of demonstrated violence and intensity, he yanked the zipper up. But he stopped and looked around again to see if anyone had noticed that sound. Apparently not. He reached in and grabbed the second zipper and started trying to pull on it. The zipper that was 5 inches from my knee, and the only thing separating myself from this person. The zipper was mildly jammed, so he was struggling for a second and trying to get the track to line up correctly. I took this second to let him know I was sitting there. I squeezed the slide in my left hand and racked my gun as hard and loud as I possibly could, then immediately put my hands into the fire-ready position, with the barrel pointing directly at him. He fell backwards onto his butt, taking 3 sliding hops back to escape while he was stumbling. He froze in place, and I could see his silhouette rise slowly from the ground with his hands up above his head. He stood in place for about 10 seconds and then slowly stepped backwards, inching away from me with every move. He continued to walk away, stop, check to see if I'm coming out, then move further away and repeat the process. Eventually, he sounded as if he had moved out of earshot. Maybe 2 to 3 minutes after I pointed my gun at him, I crawled forward and opened the zipper on my tent door. The door for my rain shell was flapping in the breeze. I quickly identified my next point of cover and didn't see any signs of anyone being around. I dodged from my tent and was able to safely maneuver to the tree stand near my vehicle. I waited in between 2 junipers and scanned the entire area before emerging from my concealment to complete a detailed patrol of camp. I did not find anything out of place or suspicious after this. I do not know which direction the person went, where they came from, and how they were able to access such a remote location while traveling on foot. To this day, it remains one of the most haunting experiences of my life. As for the rest of the trip, everything went as planned. The town is amazing, with a fascinating life story. I stayed for 2 more nights and didn't see a single other person the entire 4 days I was there. Sorry for such a long story, and thank you to everyone who stuck through to the end. I hope my experience brings the readers a spooky sense of excitement. My girlfriend at the time and I went camping 5 hours away from home for her birthday/our anniversary. We made the trip the day after a big storm passed through. We left town early and got there in the early afternoon. The guy at the entrance to the campgrounds mentioned there was no one else staying there that weekend. We were like, oh, this is gonna be sick. First, we drove down these long pathways to our designated area. As you got closer to it, the road narrowed, so basically, you had to back out to get out. We unloaded the car, got the tent set up, and decided to go walk around the woods. It was dead silent, but it was still bright out, so we just took in all the nature we could and walked a few miles away. We reached this point in the woods where there were some weird-looking white cabins. They were very uniform, all built the exact same way. Like, I guess they were a part of the camping grounds, but they seemed way out of the way. And there was no sign of life. It felt eerie to be at, like we shouldn't be there. So we turned around and walked back. We took a breather in the tent, then tried to start a fire in the fire pit. Unfortunately, neither of us had ever been camping before and had no idea how to start a fire. We had bought some of those self-lighting logs from Walmart and some lighter fluid. But everything else around us was soaked to the bone from the rain that had passed through the day before. We knew we needed kindling of some sort, but any dry sticks or leaves was far and few between. Eventually, we got a small fire going and ate hot dogs and marshmallows and spent some time looking at the stars. Then we noticed just how dark it was out there. My girlfriend was easily spooked and was like, "Can we get into the tent now?" So we put the fire out and crawled into the tent. We were talking to each other, but I could tell she was tense. Suddenly, she put her hand over my mouth and was like, "Shh, do you hear that?" Before I could respond, we heard footsteps, like heavy footsteps. It sounded like a group of people walking. I whispered to her it's probably just animals or something. Then we heard mumbling, like low mumbling. We couldn't make out words, but it didn't sound like a sound an animal could make. It sounded like words, but hushed and non-elaborated. We sat in silence, staring at each other in the dark for what felt like forever. The mumbling got louder, as did the footsteps, until it sounded like it was right outside of our tent. We both froze. I don't think either of us were breathing. And then, silence. We waited and waited and waited. I'm still not sure how much time passed. Eventually, my girlfriend said, "We have to get to your car." The adrenaline was pumping, so I peeked out of the tent into the darkness and told her to stay behind me. Then we ran to the car. I locked the doors and she was like, "What the fuck was that? We can't stay here. No one is out here but us. What was that?" I kept looking around for any signs of life, but we were seemingly alone. I looked at her and was like, "Okay, I'm gonna grab our stuff. You stay in the car." We only had our ice chest and our tent out. I hopped out and ran, grabbed our ice chest, tossed it into the back seat. As I turned around to go get the tent, I started hearing footsteps closing in again. In a moment of pure terror, I yanked the tent out of the ground, wrapped the tarp around it, and slung it over my shoulder like some panicked Santa Claus, and shoved it into the trunk. I didn't say anything when I got in the car except, "Do we have everything in here?" My girlfriend said yes, and I floored it in reverse out of our camping area. Then we came to a fork in the road that went in like 6 different directions. I asked my girlfriend if she remembered which path we came down to get in here, and she told me she didn't know. We chose a random one and ended up in a different camping spot. I cursed under my breath and slammed it into reverse again. Then I noticed from the angle we had exited from, I could see the main path back to the gate, thanks to a small sign behind an overgrown bush. As we hightailed it out of there, I noticed there was a single, small green light out in the woods to our right, near where our designated spot was. We drove the entire 5 hours back to our hometown and fell asleep on my girlfriend's parents' couch at around 4 a.m. We never talked about the trip ever again, and I haven't had any desire to camp since, lol. When I was in high school, my friends and I went out to a really remote spot in the mountains to camp. Just to get there, you needed a pretty serious off-roader. It was about 30 miles up a super rough road. There were river crossings, huge boulders in the road, and tons of sand pits. This road took us all day, and all day we didn't see a single other person. No one passed us, we didn't see anyone camping. Nothing. At one point, one of my friends noted it looked like no one had even driven on the road in a while. Which was weird because this was in Colorado and trails like this are really popular. Something worth pointing out, this road led into a box canyon, which is basically nature's cul-de-sac. The road we were on was the only road in and the only road out. All around us was massive cliffs. And another thing, we were deep in the mountains, far from any cell service. On top of that, we were in a box canyon, which even if you're next to a city, never has service. All that said, we eventually got to the spot and set up camp. Every time we went camping, we played Capture the Flag. This trip was no exception. We waited for it to get dark, then started. In the middle of the second round, me and one of my friends on my team hop up on the road, which ran parallel to area we were playing in. It seemed like a good way to get around to the other flag. Walking down road, we began to see a glow coming towards us. Our first thought was, it's another car coming towards us. But as it got closer, we realized it was a young woman holding up her phone, looking for service. She was still at a distance, but we could tell she was panicky. She was rushing and stumbling at the same time. She didn't seem drunk. It was weird. We called out, "Hello?" No response. But it wasn't just that she ignored us. It was more like she didn't even realize we were there. We tried again. "You okay?" Nothing. As she's passing us, we realize she's crying. Again, "You okay?" She stumbles right past us, never showing a single sign that she saw us. The whole time, just looking at her phone for service. My friend and I are frozen. We watch her go. Still stumbling, still crying. She rounded a turn, then disappeared. I yell out to my everyone else to meet back at camp. We do. I tell them what we saw. And I'm not proud to admit this because it seemed like she needed help. But we got creeped out. We said we'd camp that night. And in the morning, we'd go looking. The first thing we do in the morning is decide there must be some other people camped down the road. They must know her. So we go down to the end of the road. There's no sign of anyone. Then we decided to go to the entrance of the road and look for the woman. So we drive to the entrance, which took all day. Nothing. I still feel guilty for not trying harder to help her, but thinking about how she got in that position, it just doesn't make sense. She didn't look like a hiker. She had on regular jeans and a sweater. If she had gotten in the canyon from the other side, it would require a very technical descent. She would have needed gear, and she didn't even have a backpack. We were pretty sure we were the only ones that had driven down that road in a while, so it's not like someone dropped her off or left her. And the whole time we saw her, she was holding up her phone looking for service. If she knew the area at all, she would know there was no way she was going to find service. I don't know what to make of it, but I do know that the image of that woman stumbling in the dark, crying, has been seared in my brain ever since. That's it for today. Don't forget to like and subscribe.